Good morning. Let me just say something. Profound. Good. It's Tuesday, all day today. Wonderful, isn't it? So let us just sit for a moment. Let us just be present and take a breath and come back down to being here. Refocusing the mind back into the moment. So, for a while I've been really working on the fundamentals, the basis of what the practice of mindfulness is, the actual core. But let's now go to more the opposite end. Let's take a look at what happens when you are feeling anxious. We'll use anxiety to begin with, and we can go into other forms of emotional states. But stop for a moment now. I'd like you to just close your eyes and consider what it's like to be anxious, what actually happens to you when you're anxious. So spend a moment, close your eyes and focus back in and remember, what is anxiety like? What constitutes anxiety? Okay, so can you feel that list in your mind of how you recognize what it is to be anxious? Or do you just have an overwhelming sort of blocked feeling when you're anxious? What happens to you, to your mind when you're anxious? And it's really important because it's very easy to say to yourself, well, I'm feeling really anxious, but we don't really have any conscious grasp on it. And it could overwhelm us very quickly. And the first thing to remember is that when you go into anxiety, your logical mind shuts off, closes down. And that's an ancient protective method of helping you. And yet, just when you need to be clearer, you lose your clarity. You get overwhelmed by your emotions, your feelings. And as these feelings arise and begin to stream online, they begin to fire off more thoughts. Not always, but sometimes. Or you can just literally cycle round in the same anxious feeling, and almost subconsciously feel, well, maybe you don't even notice, but you will drop into being more and more of however you exhibit and experience anxiety. Now, we could shift anxiety over and you could put anger there, or you could almost any of these emotions, but I want to just work with anxiety to begin with. And how do we deal with the anxiety? Because a form of desperation can arise within us when we're feeling like this. We can feel very alone. We can feel confused. Like I say, the logical, clever mind is no longer holding it all together. It's all falling apart. I remember years ago when the banks used to always send you letters before the internet, and you just, because you didn't have a lot of money, we didn't open it. I just put it in the corner and pretend to forget about it. But every time I looked into that corner, I'd get anxiety. And it wasn't a logical anxiety, but it was a deep connective tissue in here somewhere in my brain, which was sort of adding up all of the potential resultant things which might happen due to the fact that I wasn't earning enough and there wasn't enough money in the bank. And that kind of insecurity can create huge anxiety. And then you can transport that or transpose that onto anything else. It doesn't have to be money. It could be a relationship. You're in a relationship with someone and you're invested in that relationship. And that relationship, seemingly for you, is going fine. And then suddenly you begin to feel awkward about it. You notice things and you realize there's not that connection any longer. And things are beginning to not fraying at the edges. And that creates an anxiety and makes you feel sort of sick in your tummy slightly. And it just goes on. Excuse me, just going to spray my little midges away with all those thoughts. That as it goes on, as you get the anxiety within the relationship, you can feel, and it's not very logical because you can't deal with it. You can't see it from the other person's perspective. You only see it from your perspective and how you're feeling and what that brings up in you. And again, that can catalyze and catastrophize all sorts of other feelings which go with it. Often it's disempowering. It makes you want to really distract yourself into something else rather than dealing with it, because dealing with it is really difficult because you don't even know how to deal with it. What is there to deal with if someone doesn't want to be with you, or the relationship's breaking down for whatever reason? Then there's like the security of your job, especially as we're going now into this, what they say, a deep recession or whatever. And the prospect of having to pay the bills when there's no chance of having any employment or steady employment or regular or guaranteed employment. And again, that comes into our brain and it really makes us anxious. It creates all these thoughts from the feelings, from our perception. And we do this calculation almost subconsciously. Then that blocks our clever mind, our creative mind, to deal with it. So we'll do anything else but that which perhaps is the most obvious thing to do. To be cold and rational, to be able to see the situation for what it really is like climbing a huge mountain. And or a cliff even, climbing up a cliff. And it's almost impossible with our usual mind to do that. And that's where really this practice comes into its own. Because I talk about the ways of seeing through changing your focus of attention by increasing your conscious awareness, which is a word or two words which indicate you're activating a different part of your neural processes, the way you think, in a different way, which allows you to have insight. And insight is almost creating a bypass around the emotions. We're not denying them. We're not denying the situation, but we're not allowing them to run riot and cascade and catastrophize. Because that actually, well, they must have a purpose to it. And no doubt at times, but not very often in our society, but at times it is very useful to have those emotional reactions. But with conscious awareness and insight, we can actually respond to the situation with a gentleness for ourselves and the situation, to be open about it, to accept the situation as it is, without defending ourselves as if our life depends on it. And that's an interesting one, because I know I've been in situations where one is so desperate to protect that which you were building your life on, or you supposed, or you projected forward, and suddenly it's taken away from you. It can feel so life-threatening that you'll do almost anything to try and maintain that, which is not a good idea. It really isn't. It's the best idea is to stop, sit, create conscious awareness, have insight, and bring up that issue, whatever the issue, the core issue of your anxiety is. And it's hard because you don't want to look at it. You don't want to realize it. And if it's to do with somebody else, try and step into their shoes. How do they feel? What's going on for them? Without asking them, you've got to kind of guess to begin with. Because almost guaranteed, if you go into talking straight away, you're going to get all sorts of reactivity going on. And that reactivity doesn't help. It really doesn't. People will feel judged, supposed upon. You're always telling me how I feel, da, 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 da. Therefore, if you can come back down and calm the emotions, doesn't mean you don't have them. Of course you don't. You have them even more intensely, but you don't allow them off the leash. It's like you accept them, but you ring fence them with conscious awareness. And it's effortless, actually, because you just stand back slightly, sit back slightly, breathe, be present, not trying to stop it, not trying to focus on it, not trying to do anything to it, that feeling. But we just distract our full attention into the moment. What this does is it actually stops the spiraling and the turning of the wheel. Perhaps it only slows it down, but it definitely changes the effect. And as this effect is changed on you, you can take a breath, metaphorically or really, and you will see more clearly what's actually the situation. And from that clarity, we can then discern the best route of action or whatever needs to be done. And sometimes we need to sit longer with that. I mean, yesterday I talked about the glass of water with the mud in it, and you can't see through a glass of muddy water. But if you let the muddy water settle, the mud goes down, the water becomes clear again. You can see through the water. You have perception. And that's very much what happens when we do this practice. We stop stirring our mind. You see, we have this innate belief that if we stir it even faster, we'll clear it even more. The louder I shout, the worse I feel. At least I'm doing something about it. But in truth, all we're doing is agitating it. We're upping the power. We're putting petrol on the fire. Therefore, it's really important to do practice when you're feeling good. That's really important. A daily practice when things are going well. So that when things don't go well, which is good, that inbox always gets filled up with stuff, then you have a resource. You've built yourself a deposit account of being able to draw on that part of yourself which you've been working on when things are good. So therefore, challenged, it's not nearly quite so dramatically, life-threateningly challenging. And that way, we get an insight into our anxiety. And often it's, again, a feeling about it and a realization about it. And for me, one of the best realizations is when I look out into this world. And yesterday I went for a walk up on the hill with my granddaughter. I haven't seen her for months. And my son, with social distancing, of course. And we went up to the stream and she was playing in the stream, and we had a couple of airplanes. She was playing up there, and it was idyllic. And I turned to my son and said, you realize this is your life. Now, this is it. We always are looking to the future. And we kind of forget that living in this moment now is actually all there is. So I'll leave you with that, and we'll get on with doing some movements. And I'm going to try and do it outside today. That should be